Please be seated. Proceedings are resumed.
Motions. Private members' motion number 4, 2020 to 2021. Motion to increase minimum vacation leave entitlement, to be moved by the elected member for Boddentown West and seconded by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the elected member for East End.
The member for Boddentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to move private members' motion number 4 of 2020-21, standing in my name, entitled Motion to Increase Minimum Vacation Leave Entitlement. And the motion reads as follows. Whereas the Cayman Islands is a global hub for international business, and whereas the Cayman Islands continues to strive to create a work environment that is world-class and meets international standards, and whereas it is an accepted fact, employees need time to rest, recover, and recuperate for their mental and physical health, be it therefore resolved that the government considers amending the Labour Law 2011 revision to increase each category of vacation leave entitlement by 5 days to bring the minimum vacation leave entitlement in line with international standards and to maintain the current vacation leave entitlement based on years of service. And be it further resolved that the government considers amending the Personal Regulations 2017 revision of the Public Service Management Law 2017 revision to increase each category of vacation leave entitlement by 3 days to bring the minimum vacation leave entitlement in line with international standards and to maintain the current vacation leave entitlement based on remuneration band and continuous years of service.
Please.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to second the motion.
Question is, be it therefore resolved that the government considers amending the Labour Law 2011 revision to increase each category of vacation leave entitlement by 5 days to bring the minimum vacation leave entitlement in line with international standards and to maintain the current vacation leave entitlement based on years of service. And be it further resolved that the government considers amending the Personnel Regulations 2017 revision of the Public Service Management Law 2017 revision to increase each category of vacation leave entitlement by 3 days to bring the minimum vacation leave entitlement in line with international standards and to maintain the current vacation leave entitlement based on remuneration band and continuous years of service. Honourable Member from Boddentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try not to be too long because I pretty much anticipate what the response from the other side will be. But, Mr. Speaker, when I sat down to put pen to paper, I figured that this motion would be a no-brainer when considering why we have a society in the first place. The function of society is to organize people and their actions in such a way that they are guaranteed food, shelter, and vital protection. There can be no greater protection than their health and their life. Mr. Speaker, the leading cause of death every year is cardiovascular disease. This is a group of disease that affects the heart and the blood vessel. No surprise here, Mr. Speaker, as we have been warned for years about poor diets, lack of exercise, and that smoking kills. Mr. Speaker, while those 3 things are the leading causes of cardiovascular diseases, today I want to talk about the fourth cause of cardiovascular disease, and that is stress. A Pulitzer Prize winner, Rene Du Bois, stated that what happens in the mind of a man is always reflected in the diseases of the body. Stress in the mind causes the blood vessels to constrict and raises our blood pressure and elevates our heart rate. Mr. Speaker, earlier I said that the leading cause of death worldwide was cardiovascular disease. What I did not mention was the percentage of debt that it causes worldwide. Do you know what the international number is, Mr. Speaker? It is 32%. Do you know what the Cayman number is? Do you know what the number is for Cayman, Mr. Speaker? It is 30.5%, almost the same as the international number. As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, we have had campaigns led by both government and the private sector that encourages people to exercise, watch their diets, and don't smoke. Those three things will help to reduce cardiovascular diseases. Well, Mr. Speaker, this motion is about us doing something about it. One thing that helps reduce stress is vacation, a break from work. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the First World War, nations came together to see what could be done to ensure that there are no more wars, and the League of Nations was formed. One of the things that they looked at to ensure peace and security was labor conditions. And while the League of Nations never achieved the success that it needed, as one of the proponents, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson failed to get the support from Congress to support it, there was one organization that did survive, and that is the International Labour Organization, or ILO for short. Mr. Speaker, I won't get into all the specifics and the inner workings of the ILO, except to speak about their recommendations, and in particular, their recommendations for annual vacation leave. And at this time, Mr. Speaker, Chris, 1 second. Just have these copies. They're very short, but I just want for the speaker to see them because I'll just be making a quick reference to them. One of the things, Mr. Speaker, is before I want to look at what the ILO says concerning holidays with pay convention and revised 1970 number 132. And I'm on the first page in the preamble, Mr. Speaker, and you can see that it says, having been convened at Geneva by the governing body of the International Labour Office and having met in its 54th session on the 3rd of June, 1970. And one of the things that came out of that, I just want to touch on, Mr. Speaker, is Article 3. And it says, 1, every person to whom this convention applies shall be entitled to an annual paid holiday of a specific minimum length. Each member which ratifies this convention shall specify the length of the holiday in a declaration appended to his ratification. And number 3 goes on to say, the holiday shall in no case be less than 3 working weeks for 1 year of service. And it finishes at number 4, Mr. Speaker, by saying, each member which has ratified this convention may subsequently notify the Director General of the International Labour Office by a further declaration that it specifies a holiday longer than that specified at the time of ratification. 3rd of June 1970, Mr. Speaker, it was agreed at that convention, which the ILO, I think, is 187 members across the globe, agreed that the minimum vacation leave should be 3 working weeks. And you will notice also even further down, Mr. Speaker, in one of the articles, it even goes on to recommend that 2 weeks of those 3 weeks should be continuous in the sense that it should be 2 weeks of uninterrupted vacation. But at this point, Mr. Speaker, that's not what I'm trying to get at in this motion. I just wanted to put that out there. One of the things also, Mr. Speaker, I just want to touch on briefly with regards to the International Labour Organization, and is a part that says obligation of members in respect of conventions, and it reads, in the case of a convention, A, the convention will be communicated to all members for ratification. B, each of the members undertakes that it will, within the period of 1 year, at most from the closing of the session of the conference, or if it is impossible owing to exceptional circumstances, to do so within a period of 1 year, then at the earliest practicable moment, and in no case later than 18 months from the closing of the session of the conference, bring the convention before the authority or authorities within whose competence the matter lies for the enactment of legislation or other actions. One of the things to the ILO credit, Mr. Speaker, is that when it was founded back in 1919, over 100 years ago, one of the provisions that they put inside there for the member states is for those that have colonies and independent territories was to make sure that whatever conventions that they have were actually passed on to their respective jurisdictions as a matter of convention. Now, as many members of this House may remember, is that the UK is also a founding member of the International Labour Organization. And I've been curious as to know if that was something that the UK ever contemplated rolling down to Cayman and other overseas territories, or even from back then, prior to some of the countries before they went independent. But I just want to touch on briefly, Mr. Speaker, to the Labour Law 2011 revision, and I just want to touch on the area that deals with vacation for yourself, for ease of reference, and for the listening public. And reading just on section part 2 of the law that deals with leave, and I don't want to get into all the specific, but just reading from section 3, it says, the minimum entitlement of earned leave referred to in section 1 is not exceeding 4 completed years, 2 weeks, exceeding 4 but not exceeding 10 completed years, 3 weeks, and exceeding 10 completed years, 4 weeks. So as you can see from our law, Mr. Speaker, the first 4 years of someone working at an organization, they're only entitled to 2 weeks' pay, which is actually below the recommended international standards. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, I just want to touch on the Public Service Management Law. Public Service Management Law, Personal Regulations 2017. And just looking at page 48 that deals with the different remuneration bands, you'll see that in bands R, GAA, and GBB, less than 4 years is also 12 working days, which is actually, again, below the minimum international standards. Now, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we have always told the Caymanian people, and for the countless amount of bills that we have brought before this House, it has always been about businesses meeting international standards and coming up to all of these different standards and commitments, whether it's beneficial ownership, economic substance, you name it, banking regulations, rules, everything has always been preamble with, this is international standards and we need to do something about it. What have always been lost is if we can bring all international standards that are required for businesses, which some of them are, I believe, also an overkill to some extent and over-regulation, I am a little bit surprised that no one has ever brought up the international standards or the minimum international standards with regards to employee benefits. And one of the things, Mr. Speaker, when I look at even maternity leave, and that's one of the things that I gave to the page to give you, these maternity protection convention, the 6 weeks that we have in our law was actually something that was agreed at the international level from back on the 29th of October 1919, almost 101 years ago. So in a sense, Mr. Speaker, for maternity leave, we are compliant with what the minimum international standard is. And I figured it's probably maybe just an oversight. While we strive to maintain international standards for things like maternity leave, even though we still have some more work to do maternity leave, nonetheless, is one of the things that we need to do for vacation. So one of the things I think that we need to do is start looking at some of these minimum international requirements that are needed for employees. And one of the things, Mr. Speaker, is that we need to accept that there needs to be some structural changes for us to consider other benefits. We can start with this one, but that's, again, something that can be implemented over time. I do not expect, Mr. Speaker, that this initiative or this motion, and even though we're just asking the government to consider it, is not something that can be done to business overnight. Because to move vacation leave from 10 working days to 15 working days is literally a 50% increase. But one of the things I think that we should be looking at a minimum is phase it in over a 2-3 year period where we start maybe 1 day in the next 2 years, and each year after that we probably increase it by 1 year or whatever. But this is what the government technocrats are there for, because some businesses already is offering a minimum. So one of the things that we need to start looking at is the businesses themselves that at a minimum is below the standard, and I think the Department of Labor and Pension would have or should have, and at least even with the help of ESO, at least do the necessary labor survey to see exactly where we are, and at a minimum to determine what the impact of this will be. But for one moment, I don't want anyone to think that we're pushing a motion now that's going to say, oh, if you're getting 10 days now, next year you're going to get 15. That is not the case. Because one of the things I would also really like from this, Mr. Speaker, and I know that there are the relevant competencies in the Department of Labor and Pension, is at least to do the analysis or to start looking at the analysis in terms of what other benefit it is that we need to be looking at so we can start the process of trying to at least get employee benefits up to the minimum international standards. Like I said, some of our benefits that we offer is already at that point. Mr. Speaker, I've been blessed to have worked with companies in countries where there are strong unions, and a lot of those benefits in those countries actually cascaded onto myself and some other people that I work with. But I do recognize that some people just weren't so lucky. So the primary purpose of this motion, Mr. Speaker, is to kickstart the conversation about employee benefits to ensure that they also meet international standards. And one of the things, Mr. Speaker, that if we're going to be honest with ourselves now, this entire COVID crisis has given, I think, the entire world time for pause. And we have talked about resetting the economy, looking at certain things, and what's essential employees and everything else, because jobs that people look down on even up to 2 years ago, a year ago, those are the jobs now that have become essential, that we're looking at. And I think it's only fair that some of the lowest paid jobs that we look at, whether it be a person that's working in a hotel, packing a supermarket shelf or something, those are the ones, especially those in supermarket, that became essential. And I think it's only fair for us, as we're having this conversation in terms of what Cayman will look like in a post-COVID-19 environment and what it is that we want Cayman to be. At the end of the day, we still need to make sure that we are giving people what it is that they're supposed to be getting. So I don't want anyone to be alarmed to think that this is something to go out there and increase costs on businesses, but rather, if anything, is to increase the health and the longevity of their customers. Because if there's one thing a business like, it's somebody who's healthy. And if somebody's sick up inside a hospital, unless you're in the business of being a doctor or running a hospital, at a minimum, you still will want your customers to be healthy so that at least can come out and patronize your business. So what I'm asking the government is to go out, and I just want to reread it, because, Mr. Speaker, the last time I put a motion out there, the response I got back was a little bit different. So I just want to reread again what the resolve section is. And it says, that's what they say, again, Mr. Speaker, I'm responsible for what I say. I'm not responsible for what people hear. And I just want to read the resolve section one last time. Be it therefore resolved that the government considers amending the Labor Law 2011 revision to increase each category of vacation leave entitlement by 5 days to bring the minimum vacation leave entitlement in line with international standards and to maintain the current vacation leave entitlement based on years of service. Now, again, I do recognize it is a tall order in terms of bumping each of them up, but at a minimum, I still think that we need to start the conversation of ensuring that within the private sector, we put just about all of these stresses on to meet international standards and international standards, is that the employee benefits also reach a standard. And then also within the government itself, Mr. Speaker, since they're covered by the Public Service Management Law, Public Service Management Law, yes, that the government, be it further resolved, that the government considers amending the Personnel Regulations 2017 revision and the Public Service Management Law 2017 revision to increase each category of vacation leave entitlement by 3 days and to bring the minimum vacation leave entitlement in line with international standards and to maintain the current vacation leave entitlement based on remuneration and ban of continuous service. Again, Mr. Speaker, I don't want anyone to go out and think that we're looking for an immediate bump up in vacation, but at a minimum, since we already start looking at what a post-COVID-19 Cayman would look like, at least I believe, again, as I said earlier, that we can walk and chew gum, that we can look at multiple things. We do have the capability, we have the ability to plan for the future. And at some point, we need to start somewhere. And I'm hoping that this motion is actually kickstarting that process to at least have the conversation. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will leave it for other members them to comment on accordingly. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I sit here and close my eyes and listen to the honourable member who has moved the motion, the member from Bordentown West, I can't help but think that he has been transported either back to a time before the world and Cayman was in the middle of a pandemic and an economic crisis, or he is thinking so far ahead that a cure has been found for COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, I know that we are in something of a bubble in Cayman in terms of the risks from COVID-19, in the sense that while the country is not COVID-free, it is essentially travelers who are being tested positive with it. Mr. Speaker, the one thing that the opposition doesn't seem to understand and appreciate is that these very good suggestions about improving the quality of life of employees all cost money. The government has been and is still doing everything it can to assist employees who are either not working at all or who are earning significantly less than otherwise they would were it not for the crisis. We are also taking every possible measure we can to keep businesses afloat and to assist businesses. We have spent and are spending millions of dollars. We are proposing, in fact, we agreed in this meeting about proposing to underwrite guarantees for $200 million of potential loans by private sector financial institutions to businesses, underwriting, giving a 50% guarantee. I was at pains earlier to point out in answer to one of the parliamentary questions how many thousands of businesses there are in Cayman. Mr. Speaker, what the member is proposing with respect to the private sector, I'll speak to the public sector separately because government is already doing that, or I mean in the process of getting that done, to be more accurate. The additional 3 days would add another full work week of vacation obligation to businesses. 5 days is the usual work week. Mr. Speaker, that is additional cost to businesses. We had questions from the opposition this morning on, correctly, about how many Caymanians are unemployed. Mr. Speaker, we are doing everything we can to encourage businesses to keep employees employed and to hire more Caymanians. What this motion is proposing, and it's all well and good for the member to say, well, I'm not saying it's for next year. Mr. Speaker, if it is not for next year, I suggest that the opposition write this along with their proposal for independence into their manifesto and sell that to the electorate as this is our platform, this is what we will do when we take office. Not 5 months before the House is dissolved, in the middle of a global pandemic and economic crisis that the government and businesses are scrambling to survive, to suggest adding increased financial burden to businesses. As I said, Mr. Speaker, sometimes I wonder if they, somehow because of the good conditions in Cayman presently, that they've forgotten that we are still in both a public health and economic crisis. Mr. Speaker, the member said that he is responsible for what he says, not for what I hear. But, Mr. Speaker, if anyone were ever in doubt of how long I've been here, the leader of the opposition earlier pointed that out right down to the very day. And the many years down here in listening to speeches like the one that the member from Bordentown West delivered just now and the one previously have taught my ears and discernment to appreciate when things are done earnestly and when they are done because it is good politics. Now, Mr. Speaker, far be it from me to suggest that members shouldn't resort to political ploys and make good political speeches when they're here. This is, as the leader of the opposition proudly proclaims, the house of politics. But don't try to pretend to me or anyone else that this motion brought at this point in the electoral election cycle and in the middle of a global and public health pandemic isn't about trying to persuade persons out there that you're looking after their best interests.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
What is your point of
The
order?
Premier can't sit down and try to look at what our motives are and things like that. The standing order won't allow him to do that. To question our motives, what we're doing. I have people impure motive. I have people to represent just like him. I got people working out that's stressed out that need a break. In all of this they've been working too. What about them? So he can't sit down and question my motive. I bring this on behalf of what people ask me to bring. I work for people too, you know.
I think it's fair enough to say that the member is saying, look, my motives, and it's I don't know how I can do it because I don't have the standing orders says anything about it. But members are free to say, look, my motives are just.
Mr. Speaker, I never suggested for a moment they're not just. I said, he's seeking to persuade people that what he's proposing is in their best interest. That's what we all do. But, Mr. Speaker, in this case, I want to suggest that it is not in the best interest of anyone at this stage that additional financial burdens are placed on businesses, because it's going to discourage them from hiring more people, and it may actually cause them, as Butterfield Bank is now doing, to lay off significant numbers of people. This is real, Mr. Speaker. And if the member from Bordentown West and his colleagues on the other side don't appreciate that we are in an economic crisis as a country, then I think they need to get some meetings with the business community and get to understand the kind of pressures that businesses are under just to stay in business. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Deputy Governor has had to leave because he is doing his annual Deputy Governor's Awards this evening. But he has asked me if I would, on his behalf, present the following with respect to his position regarding the proposal to increase the vacation leave entitlement of civil servants. I am, Mr. Speaker, not going to paraphrase or to edit or comment in any way. I am simply going to read what he has handed to me as the position of the Deputy Governor who is responsible for the civil service.
Mr. Speaker,
Member for Georgetown Central,
Mr. Speaker, if
are you rising on a point of order?
yes, just for clarity of the procedure matter, this is the first time I've seen one member speak on behalf of.
No, it's absolutely permissible. He has had permission. A minister can speak to another minister's proposals or bring a bill in for another minister when that minister has to be absent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm reading from the script. I wish to offer brief remarks in this Honourable House in relation to private members' motion number 4 of 2020-2021, which seeks to increase the minimum vacation leave entitlement. As the Honourable members of this House may recall, in November 2018, a private member's motion was unanimously approved in the Legislative Assembly. That motion requested the establishment of a steering committee to review and look at implementing a performance incentive compensation scheme within the civil service. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to report that work in this area has commenced, namely the Pay and Reward Review Project, which is being led by the portfolio of the civil service. I'm also pleased to report that annual leave entitlements, the subject of this private member's motion, are already being considered as part of that larger project. Mr. Speaker, when considering the appropriate number of days annual leave, it is first important to reflect on the statutory requirements, which in Cayman are 2 weeks for those persons not exceeding 4 years service, 3 weeks for those exceeding 4 years, but not exceeding 10 years service, and 4 weeks for those with over 20 years service. Currently, our trainee positions and hourly paid workers, that is those on grades R, GAA, and GBB, receive 12 days vacation leave in the first 3 years, 15 days leave in years 4 to 7, 18 days for years 7 to 10, and 20 days leave after year 10. Mr. Speaker, this means that our trainees and hourly paid workers are already above the statutory requirements upon joining the service and move to the statutory minimum after 4 and 10 years. Despite this, we are nonetheless contemplating increasing the annual leave entitlements for these employees to match those of salaried workers on grades L to Q, which are well in excess of the statutory minimum for their relative length of service. In carrying out the research to assist us with conducting the Pay and Reward Review, relevant jurisdictions were examined to allow for comparisons of annual leave entitlements. To date, we have noted that the 2 weeks minimum annual leave under the labor law is largely consistent with other relevant jurisdictions, for example, the UK and Jersey. Further, we noted that in Bermuda and the Bahamas, employees are not eligible for the 2 weeks annual leave until 1 week's service has been completed. We've also noted that there are more public holidays in the Cayman Islands than in the UK, Jersey, or Bermuda, which is an important consideration when making leave comparisons. Mr. Speaker, while the portfolio of the civil service has made good strides with work in this area, additional work is required to ensure the successful delivery of the entire project. Already, recommendations have been put forward for consideration, including recommendations that are specific to annual leave entitlements. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I wish to reiterate that the civil service values its employees and understands the importance of offering competitive benefits, including leave. That said, we will continue to do what is necessary to make lives better, starting with considering how we can make the lives of our valued employees better. Work in this area continues, and we are committed to seeing this project through to completion. Mr. Speaker, that is the position of the Deputy Governor with respect to the proposal in relation to the civil service vacation leave entitlement. But, Mr. Speaker, back to the original and more troubling aspect of this motion. I was just speaking to the Honourable Deputy Premier before I rose, and we were talking about the need tomorrow to make a statement, or for him to make a statement about the reason why the tourism stipends that the government has been paying for months now have not yet been paid. That is because we have to come to this Honourable House to get approval for another $10 million to cover those costs. And until that is actually approved, we are unable to pay the stipends. I say that, Mr. Speaker, to give some sense of reality to members on the other side who seem to think that money falls like manna from heaven, and that businesses out there are not struggling, are not striving just to keep their heads above water and to keep people on the payroll. We cannot, Mr. Speaker, do anything at this time, even in terms of sending a message that we are intent upon increasing their costs and their outgoings. As I said, Mr. Speaker, we are 5 months before this House is dissolved. If members wish to put forward a platform of increased social benefits, that is entirely proper and appropriate. If they want to advocate for independence, that is also entirely appropriate. But they need to put these things in their manifesto and not try to foist upon the government the responsibility for moving either of these kinds of initiatives forward. The government has its own plan and programs, and we are determined to complete those insofar as possible during this term, and in due course we'll tell the populace what we will do if we are afforded a third term. But it is not right for the opposition to expect the government to implement their plans, their proposals at this stage. They must have the courage to not just speak in this House, but to write them down, put them in a manifesto, and attempt to persuade the electorate that that is in their best interest and that they should vote for those who propose and support these measures. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't be very long, other than to just add that I'm quite disappointed with the Premier constantly insinuating that the members of opposition are campaigning for independence. Mr. Speaker, I know that from a media perspective in marketing that there's a strategy, if you repeat it enough times, it'll take its own course of action and people will start to believe it. And I think the Premier is strategically trying to do that now, because I sat here today and I've heard him say it 9 times already. And I've yet to hear from any of my colleagues on the opposition side said that they are campaigning for the Cayman Islands to go independent. Now, I don't know if this is a campaign strategy by the Premier to try to put fear in the hearts of the voters that the members of the opposition are advocating for independence. But I just want to put it on record that if we continue to hear that from the Premier, I can only bring it up in the standing orders that he's trying to maliciously, I'm talking about politicking, and that the member from Bontown West is playing politics. I think that is politics 101 right there. I know that there is time for politics, and by all means, I can't stop the Honourable Premier from doing that, but I don't think that's genuine. That's not correct. That's by saying, you know, some of the things that we've been dealing with over the last few months or the last year that are concerning for us in respect to our control mechanisms as Caymanians and our own well-being, that we shouldn't talk about them. Every time we say something about whether or not Caymanians are in charge of their own destiny, the Premier alludes to the fact they were trying to go independent, and it's not true. It's disappointing, to be honest. He's my Premier. I am a registered voter. I'm from the Cayman Islands, and I'm a Caymanian. And my constitution says he's my Premier. And for him to sell this argument to the Cayman public that that's what members in this House is doing is disappointing. And to be honest with you, he should be ashamed of himself. There's level of politics, and that one is not good, because that can put some serious fear in the hearts of many Caymanians. So, Mr. Speaker, with that being said, I'm not going to add. I mean, by all means, in every context of every contribution, there's good points and strong points. I'm not going to be disillusioned to say that the Premier hasn't made some points of concern that we should be aware about. But let's just wait at least till after Christmas for the politicking, because that's specifically what he's doing. And he knows it. The public knows it. And I ask the public to listen carefully. Listen carefully, because he's strategically trying to paint that picture. And if you hear him continuously try to say it, it's because he's trying to create a narrative. The politics has started. At least I know for Kenneth Bryan, representing the good people of the Cayman Islands, and particularly that of Georgetown Central, I'm still focusing on my job. The campaign hasn't started for me. I'm still doing the work. And I ask the Premier to stop, please. Please stop. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I won't be long either, but it's getting a little boring now. That you constantly go at this man. The Premier, he invites it, you know. He loves controversy. Mr. Speaker, he did this for at least 8 years with you. It worked then that you, Mr. Speaker, was promoting independence. He sat right there and did it. He stood up here and it worked then. It doesn't work any longer. You used it once, too many. Look at all those on your side that has been advocating it. You don't hear me saying it. Yet, when any member of the opposition or anywhere else says something about we need to have dialogue about it or something of that nature, this man gets up in here. This is 2 days straight now. He has been on this narrative that we must put it in manifesto. He went in the byways and the highways with your name in his mouth like a gall when he was in the opposition. With the same thing, the Deputy Premier remembers that. We didn't talk it, he talked it. We didn't go then campaign on it, he did. And him and his erstwhile leader, I'm gonna forget about it. Somebody seems to have forgotten in here. I guess you gotta live it to know it, eh? Now he's come with this same narrative for this election again. The people are going to get sick and tired of it. Mr. Speaker, if the Premier wants to talk about the motion, he's not going to accept it. That's his position. That's the government's position. When they drop this thing about the opposition wanting to put undue stress or undue requirements on businesses and the likes. And I understand the politics of it too. I truly do. But it has been, its course has run out. This thing about independence. I recall one of the gentlemen in this legislature saying that too, and talking about how you can't make people have freedom of conscience. And it ran out on him too. Ran out on him too. The people got sick and tired of him constantly banging that drum. And they took the head off the drum, and he was no more. Every time this premier wants to have a campaign platform, he starts about everybody wants independence. You know how many times he's done this? But it's getting boring, it's getting old. He needs to stop it. I understand his political strategy. You make him come with it. You tell him, come on down. Everybody will get a little peace.
Yeah, they really didn't expect it to stop at that point. Does any other member wish to speak? The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the member from Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will also be brief, but you know, it is trying, it is tiring. I've heard the Premier repeatedly introduce into this meeting of this House that the opposition is pushing for independence, that we are trying to threaten the business community. He insinuates that we don't understand business. Mr. Speaker, I never blow my own horn, but when you get challenged like that, and I know what he's doing, Mr. Speaker, he's campaigning. When you get challenged like that, and clearly his campaign strategy that his consultants have advised him to use now is to beat that drum that we're pushing for independence and we don't know nothing about business. Mr. Speaker, the member from Bordentown West is a CPA. He has the credentials to understand business. I myself, Mr. Speaker, have a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science. I have an MBA from the Maxwell School of Business at Syracuse University. I am 3 classes, modules away from having a law degree. I don't want to brag about these things, but I've heard my law degree being introduced into discussions in here too, so I know they're going to somehow try and be used against me. We have the qualifications, we have the experience in our working careers prior to becoming representatives to understand business and see with businesses and understand that we have to balance the approach between employer and employee. We understand that. It is academic to us. But for the Premier to continually be doing this over and over and over again is clearly an indication that he is more interested in playing politics than fixing the problems of this country. He has embarked on his re-election bid, and I feel bad for the people of this country. Those people who are sitting at home staring at an empty refrigerator, staring at their children knowing that they don't have a job, staring at the ceiling wondering how they're going to pay their staff at the end of the week. All those problems, Mr. Speaker, are on our shoulders, and the Premier decides to turn this into a campaign speech once again. Mr. Speaker, I am committing myself to putting in as much of effort as I can in the time remaining here, leading up to the next election, to dealing with those issues. We will continue to bring these motions. We will continue to make suggestions. We are not going to be sidetracked. We're not going to be drawn into this political banter, this childish behavior, and it is unbecoming of any of us to continue doing it. It is tiring, and I've had enough of it. He can continue listening to his political advisors and following their silly advice. The same ones that were up and down in our communities that didn't know to turn left or right because they weren't even from here. Knocking on my constituents' doors telling them not to vote for me. He can continue following them kind of people. But I am going to focus on the problems of this country until the last day possible. He can do as he pleases. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Last call. Does any other member wish to speak? I'm sure that the mover, he indicated that he had to step out a minute. I think he's in the office getting some information. The member for Borden Town West, you had your chance really. The member for Borden Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just waiting on something to give to this Honourable House, something I'm going to read on, but it doesn't stop me from at least starting back. Is there?
To read from it?
Yeah, so I have copies here. Let's distribute that there for me, please, Chris, thanks. Mr. Speaker, before I get into this, my rebuttal for the Premier to come with, I wanted to remind the House of something that was done in an international newspaper, the Jamaica Observer, on February 28, 2019. And the headline reads, Cayman sends warning to Britain, says it will go for independence if UK insists on new rules, including same-sex marriages. And they have a nice picture there of the Premier, I must admit. Not a bad-looking picture, too, if I gotta be honest. He's not a bad-looking man. I have to give Jack his jacket. You know? Nice grey suit, too. Good tie. Cayman flag in the background. Handsome fellow. You can't take that from him. But Mr. Speaker, says it will go for independence if UK insists on new rules, including same-sex marriage. And, yeah, I'm just going to read what was said in an international newspaper, and it says, Georgetown, Cayman Islands, Premier Alden McNeil McLaughlin Jr. says he will lead the move towards independence for this British overseas territory if the British government accepts a report by the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee that recommends new measures with London relationships with the BOTs. In its 44-page report titled Global Britain and the British Overseas Territories, Resetting the Relationship, the committee recommended an overhaul of voting rights, setting a date for same-sex marriages, and implementing public beneficial ownership registers by 2020. It goes on to read, Mr. Speaker, but McLaughlin said he found the report shameful because it seeks to impose a new era of neocolonialism on the BOTs that include Montserrat, British Virgin Islands, Anguilla, Bermuda, and the Turks and Caicos Islands. It is not a government committee. It is merely recommendations to the government which the government can accept or not accept, as the case may be, McLaughlin said, adding, I know everybody's a bit exercised about this, but I would caution people not to get too overly concerned about it. It is not the view of the government, he said, adding, the report does not reflect the current UK government's position with respect to these matters. The committee, in its report released in London last week, said belongership and its equivalents are wrong, noting that while we recognize that the BOTs are small communities with unique cultural identities, we do not accept that there is any justification to deny legally resident British overseas territory and the UK citizen the right to vote and to hold elected office. This elevates one group of British people over another and risks undermining the ties that bind the UK and the OTs together in one global British family. It suggests that London should initiate a consultation with elected governments of the BOTs and work with them to agree a plan to ensure that there is a pathway for all resident UK and British overseas territory citizens to be able to vote and hold elected office in a territory. McLaughlin made it clear he would be leading the charge for independence should London agree on accepting the recommendations contained in that report. The day, a member for Georgetown Central asked me to repeat, Mr. Speaker. He said, McLaughlin made it clear he would be leading the charge for independence should London agree on accepting the recommendation contained in the report. The day the UK government seriously considers that persons who are not Caymanians can stand for office, here is the day. If I'm still able and alive, I lead the charge for independence, he said. Mr. Speaker, this is what is in the international media of what it is that the Premier of the Cayman Islands says. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, and you of all people know this, if anyone believes that the words from the Honourable member from Savannah of what he said yesterday carries more impact than the words of the Premier, and I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I was right there in London, and I give the Premier his props because I was inspired and I was moved. He looked at those rooms of hundreds of people that were there for that Cayman function. You were there too, Mr. Speaker. So was the member from Georgetown South and also the member from Northside. And I hear with my own ears what the Premier said, and it's something along the lines, and he can correct me if I get it wrong. Independence, like my death, is inevitable, but I hope neither comes soon. Mr. Speaker, the first time I hear the words independence used since being elected in this House was from the Honourable Premier, nobody else. So, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you, if he wants to start the political game of playing up to the gallery and everything else with this independence, because people in this country are getting tired and fed up of the double standards and being treated like second-class citizens in their own country, because the member for Savannah is hearing something that many of us have said. And you yourself, Mr. Speaker, know that the recent actions of the governor with that domestic partnership bill left a poor taste in many people's mouth, and I too have also heard other people say it. You see, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to step back a little bit, because many people inside they read the Bible, but there's one thing that they actually miss in reading the Bible, especially the New Testament. All those letters that Paul wrote to the Romans and all of that was for a reason. And I'm going to explain that reason to you in a bigger nutshell. During the Roman Empire, Mr. Speaker, there were many wars, many battles. People were fighting a lot. And one of the main underlying basis for those wars was religious belief. You see, Rome had their own gods, which we refer to as Roman gods, which we all know about that from, just like the Greek had theirs, the Roman had theirs. They had many gods. And while they were in the empire, they kept trying to push the Roman doctrine throughout the empire. And there was a lot of pushback on religious belief because other countries, other areas of the Roman Empire had their own god. The Greeks had their gods, the Jewish had their gods, everybody had their different god. And the empire, the Roman Empire, was constantly at war. And one of the things that they came up with to bring peace within the Roman Empire was something that they termed the one God concept, where they said to the different people, listen, rather than push all of these gods, we're just going to push one God. If you want to call him Yahweh, because in all of the different gods that they had in different regions, there was always one God that was more powerful than all the other gods. And they said, rather than try to push 12, 13 different gods, let us push one. If you want to call him Odin, you want to call him Zeus, you want to call him Jehovah, you want to call him Yahweh, that's fine. One God concept, because you may call him that, someone else call him that, to bring peace. The point I'm making, Mr. Speaker, is from back then, centuries ago, Rome realized that people fight wars based on their religious belief. When the United States was being formed, Mr. Speaker, the genesis behind separation of church and state and their distrust was they did not want the Pope having as much power in their new country as they did in Europe. Again, they recognized the strength of people's religious belief and their convictions. And I'm sure that many members in this house must realize that many people, when you come into their country and you disrespect their norms, their values, their religious beliefs, they make fun of members in this house for praying. They make fun of members in this house for their religious belief and their conviction, things that all of us grow up inside here. These are the kind of conversations that follow through. People take their relationship with their God very seriously. And I can tell you right now, Mr. Speaker, for many Caymanians, their relationship to God is more important than their relationship to the United Kingdom. And if nobody can understand that, I hope this makes it clear today. And as long as you have people in this country that is making fun and belittling our religious belief, you will have people saying that. Because I can tell you, I have heard people say it, people who have never expected I would have heard it from. So I just want to make it clear. For the God-fearing people of the Cayman Islands, their relationship with God supersedes their relationship with the United Kingdom. So I hope people understand, and I hope the governor in the UK and everyone up there understands that just as how the Roman Empire and everybody else fall for the same belief, not respecting other people's belief, this is what happens. Okay? So if they want to sit down and talk about independence, let them understand the reason why we're having this discussion today. And if they want to go put that and make that a campaign issue, this can become a campaign issue too, because it was the Premier who said it, for the same report that called for it. So if he has lost his conviction and his ability to stand and fight against the UK, that is fine. But I can tell you, at 47 years of age, Chris Saunders is fired up and ready to go to fight for the convictions that I have, that my parents instilled in me. And that relationship means more to me. I've already lost one election. My life wasn't ruined. You think I got a problem losing another one? But I'm not losing my relationship with my God for nobody. I have been to that door already, Mr. Speaker. I know the grace of God. I know the grace of God. So that, I want to leave that there. Now, the Premier talked about Butterfield Bank, and that people in opposition need to learn to talk to people in business, the business community. We do. Sometimes, when they want to complain on the government, we think they call. They don't call them, because they're afraid their work permits or something may get deferred or denied or something like that. They call us. You know how much calls we get complaining about when they wanted the Premier to open the country up and this and that? And we all said one thing. We support the Premier. We agree with the Premier. People above profits. That was the policy that this government took during this crisis. People above profits. People above businesses. Lives matter. That was the policy that took us through COVID. And we still support the Premier for taking that position today. I still get business people complaining to me about how much business that they have lost. We can rebuild businesses, but we can't rebuild lives. Something along the line that the Premier said, and I stood beside him then when he said it. And if he still means it, I will stand beside him, but I'm hearing something different now. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Member for Mr. Leader of Opposition, for reminding me that we put it in black and white, supporting his position. Butterfield Bank, he touched on, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Butterfield went out and didn't lay his staff off. Butterfield offered a voluntary separation package. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, the problem that I have is that those jobs were not jobs that were made redundant. Those were jobs that were transferred to other jurisdictions. That's what really happened there, is that they transferred the jobs to places where they think it could be cheap. And the ironic thing about it, Mr. Speaker, some of the very places that they're running these jobs to, when you look at the benefits that they offer their employees over there, it is better than what we have here in the Cayman Islands. The real reason, Mr. Speaker, if you want to get into it, is all of these regulations and all of these international standards that we keep burying business with down here. We're killing them with red tape, but then you want to talk about when we want international standards for the employees, we can't get it. We have all this international stress, but we can't get none of the employee benefits. And Mr. Speaker, all we're asking the government is to sit down. You have the technocrats. You have the expertise. You have almost 6,000 something people employed in the public service that can do this research. We can walk and chew gum. The civil service that we have is very capable and very qualified of doing this kind of analysis. We have seen them do it. The Deputy Governor has worked hard to build a world-class civil service. And unless the Premier thinks that they're too dumb to do it or unable to do it, and we need to hire more consultants to do it, then we have to depart in terms of how it is that we look at things.
But he can't walk and chew gum, you see, no ride bicycle.
He can ride, man. I've seen him ride. Okay, that's a different story. Mr. Speaker, the Premier used a line, and I wrote it down as he said it. Government and businesses are scrambling to survive. Thank you, member from Newlands. And I remember saying to myself, the reason I write it down, what about the people that are scrambling to survive? Mr. Speaker, if any business in this country had $100 million profit or $150 million profit, we would have chased them out of town as quicker than anything for making so much money in Cayman. Do we honestly believe that having a fiscal situation where we're running $100 to $150 million a year surplus at the expense of businesses, at the expense of people, you have taken that much money out of the economy over the last 6-7 years? That's roughly $700 or $800 million worth of surpluses that the government made from taking from businesses and people. So much so that when the crisis hit, guess who is the only person in town that is in the financial position after running 100, 150 million surpluses for years to help anybody? It's the government. Why? When you take that much money from people, you think they could find themselves anything in a crisis? And then have the audacity and the temerity, after taking so much money out of the economy, taking money out of the business, the pockets of business, taking money out of the pockets of consumers, want to complain about, I have to go find $10 million now to go help somebody. You should have left them with it. They would have been in a position to help themselves. Make CUC post $150 million profit and see how quick we go after them. Make one bank in this country make $150 million profit. Make the supermarkets make $150 million profit. Let the insurance company make $150 million profit and see what happened to them. Oh, no. But for whatever reason, it's okay for we to all of this up. And what do we spend it on? Roads and everything else. So, Mr. Speaker, I got to say this much to you. I get it that we are now in the silly season. The Premier has already kicked off his re-election campaign. He has already announced that he is running re-election. No one on this side have announced as yet, because at this point we're still focused on people's jobs. We understand with the changing of any leadership that they have to, the train has to start. That's what I mean. You got big machinery. You got to get the train moving. I enjoy being an independent member from Bordentown West. I enjoy not needing a massive amount of money to go get re-election, because I never got no engine or no empire, anything to build. So I have the flexibility to work for the people until nomination day, and then we can start. And even then, whether I'm returned or not, if I run or not or whatever, at least I know I would have done something for my country. So, Mr. Speaker, I accept, like I said from when I opened up, I knew what the government position would have been, because the silly season has started, and it's really, really sad. But, as I said in my last debate, woe be unto the shepherds who feed themselves and not the flock. The money that we have here is the people's money. And at the end of the day, it is the money that we have taken from businesses from how many years. And Mr. Speaker, I want to once again thank you for putting the government finances in this position. Because when you didn't get it in 2009, it wasn't this pretty. And you turn it around. You paid a price for ticking off a lot of people. And if anybody inside here knows firsthand the higher of the UK government, it is you. So I don't need to think there. But I can tell you this much. One person that has really inspired me the most is Martin Luther King Jr. And while he's best remembered for his I Have a Dream speech, people need to realize they never killed Martin Luther King because he had a dream. They killed Dr. King because he woke up. And if you listen to the final words of his final speech on the final night before he was assassinated, Dr. King said, "I've been to the mountaintop. I have looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get there one day. So tonight, I'm not fearing any man, because my eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. I believe in our people. I believe in what we can do. And if it has to take for us to make it a political issue or a manifesto issue, then we'll take it to the Cayman people. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Question is, be it therefore resolved that the government considers amending the Labor Law 2011 revision to increase each category of vacation leave entitlement by 5 days to bring the minimum vacation leave entitlement in line with international standards and to maintain the current vacation leave entitlement based on years of service. And be it further resolved that the government considers amending the Personnel Regulations 2017 revision and of the Public Service Management Law 2017 revision to increase each category of vacation leave entitlement by 3 days to bring the minimum vacation leave entitlement in line with international standards and to maintain the current vacation leave entitlement based on remuneration band and continuous years of service. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against?
No.
Mr. Speaker, division, please.
Clerk, divide.
Honourable Alden McLaughlin.
No.
Honourable Moses Kukernal.
No.
Honourable Juliana O'Connor Connolly.
No.
Honourable Dwayne Seymour.
No.
Honourable Roy Mike Taggart.
No.
Honourable Joseph Hugh.
No.
Honourable Tara Rivers is absent. Mr. Bernie Bush. Captain Eugenie Banks.
No.
Honourable Barbara Connolly.
No.
Mr. David White.
No.
Mr. Austin Harris.
No.
Mr. Ezra Miller is absent. Mr. Alva Saku.
Aye.
Mr. Kenneth Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Anthony Eden is absent. Mr. Christopher Saunders.
Yes.
Honourable Arden McLean.
Yes.
Results of the division: 4 ayes, 10 noes, 4 absentees. The motion has failed. Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his kind remarks. Mr. Speaker, before I adjourn, just a note about tomorrow. There are 9 bills, but the first 2 will be withdrawn because they need to be looked at again. And the Minister for Financial Services will be unavoidably absent tomorrow again. But I will take those 2 bills, the Securities Investment Business Amendment number 2 bill and the Limited Liability Partnership Amendment number 2 bill. So we will proceed with bills 3 through 8. I believe, Mr. Speaker, with a bit of luck and some cooperation, we can probably get through the second readings of those bills tomorrow, although I doubt we'll get into committee.
You look in cooperation with what happened today? Really?
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the Leader of the Opposition understands what robust debate is, so I'm not going to say anything about that. Mr. Speaker, I move the adjournment of this Honourable House until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Question is that this Honourable Legislative Assembly stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. All in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This Honourable Legislative Assembly stands adjourned.